The Senate has officially approved a $3.5 trillion budget blueprint. Now, this is a resolution, meaning that they haven't actually voted on the final legislation yet, but this is the reconciliation bill that we've been talking about for months and months. The very bill that includes all of the agenda items in Biden's infrastructure package that didn't actually make it in the bipartisan infrastructure package. Now, that includes much of what was, again, left out of Biden's proposals in his infrastructure proposal. And of course, not a single GOP lawmaker in the Senate voted in favor of it, but that was to be expected. Again, this is the $3.5 trillion bill that includes things like childcare, elder care. Here, let me give you a list of provisions that are included that was provided by Bernie Sanders to Jeff Stein of the Washington Post. It includes child tax benefits, universal pre-K, paid family and medical leave, tuition-free community college, lower prescription drug costs, dental, hearing, vision, Medicare expansion, housing, home care, major climate action, immigration reform specifically pertaining to DACA recipients. It also includes lower Medicare age, meaning that it seeks to expand Medicare to cover more individuals, Obamacare expansion, increasing physical supply, and also, I'm gonna keep it real, I don't know what increasing physical supply means. But it does have important provisions that do fund certain things that help ordinary Americans rather than corporate America. And where would the revenue come from? It would come from a beefed up IRS, meaning that it would be funded to do the audits necessary on tax dodgers at the very top. It would tax the rich, tax corporations, and also implement fees on polluters. And it would include Medicare negotiations. Now, that's a summary of the bill. The reason why we're giving you a summary is because we don't have the actual legislation in front of us yet, because all they did was vote on a blueprint. They didn't vote on the end legislation, they just voted on this blueprint, and it passed with every Democratic senator voting in favor of it. So that's positive news, except we're already hearing that while some of these corporate Democrats in the Senate voted in favor of the resolution, they're unlikely to vote in favor of the final bill because they have issues with, let's keep it real, taxing the rich. Now, the chamber's approval of the budget framework came after an hours-long spectacle known as voterama. The process is where senators are allowed to offer an unlimited number of largely meaningless and non-binding provisions. So non-binding means that nothing's gonna happen, right? They propose these provisions, they debate the provisions, they give their floor speeches about these provisions, but at the end of the day, these amendments to the resolution are in fact non-binding. Now, Senator Ron Wyden, who's the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, offered an amendment expressing support for tax increases on the nation's richest 0.1%. The measure actually failed. It failed. Why did it fail? Because Senators Kyrsten Sinema, Janine Shaheen, and Maggie Hassan joined every Republican in voting no. So that's a red flag, because that made it very clear that there are several Democratic lawmakers in the Senate who have a problem with increasing taxes on the rich in order to pay for some of the provisions in this more robust bill. Now, it's now being referred to as a budget bill. It was originally referred to as the second half of the infrastructure bill, the reconciliation version that allows for its passage with a simple majority in the Senate. But it's clear that Kyrsten Sinema, who has no problem infuriating her own base, her own constituents, would fight this legislation when it comes down to a final vote in the Senate. The $3.5 trillion budget resolution now heads to the House, which can either pass the measure as is or amend it and send it back to the Senate. House Democratic Majority Leader Steny Hoyer announced Tuesday that the lower chamber will cut its recess short to take up the measure on August 23rd. So the real question now is, what is likely to happen once this legislation makes its way to the House? Because there has unfortunately also been some pushback from corporate Democrats in the House. Now, in the House, Democrats do have a majority. It isn't a large enough majority to prevent a block of corporate Democrats from stopping its passage. So we'll see what happens there. But understand that both in the Senate and the House, you have corporate Democrats who plan to stand in the way, and that's a huge, huge problem. Now, the other problem is you have corporate media and the way that it frames these types of stories, these types of proposals. On one hand, you have the slimmed down bipartisan infrastructure bill, which includes corporate handouts, which includes privatizing public infrastructure. And it seems like the media has been pretty favorable in their coverage toward that bipartisan bill. It's historic, it's historic. Oh my gosh, we never thought that Democrats and Republicans could work together to pass anything. I got news for you, when it comes to corporate handouts, they'll work together to pass anything. Now, the way that they talk about the $3.5 trillion budget deal, that's also fascinating. Now, pay close attention to how CNN framed both pieces of legislation when they covered this story.
A two-headed monster is making its way through the US Senate. On one track, a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package poised for a final vote late tonight or early tomorrow morning. And then on the other, a $3.5 trillion budget resolution, which was just released today.
A two-headed monster? It's an interesting way of framing legislation that improves infrastructure, and in the case of the $3.5 trillion proposal, improves the lives of ordinary Americans through legislation, which honestly hasn't happened in a long, long time. But let's watch a little more of CNN's coverage on this, because some of their reporting is important, especially the reporting that calls out the Democratic lawmakers who have a problem with increasing taxes on the wealthy in order to pay for all those provisions that we desperately need.
The Senate also set in the coming days to pass the $3.5 trillion budget blueprint that unlocks the ability to pass the second piece, packed with progressive priorities, through the Senate on a simple majority vote.
The most significant legislation for American families since the era of the New Deal and the Great Society.
Setting up weeks of closed-door negotiations over a package set to include home and child care, free community college, universal pre-K, paid leave, and even a pathway to citizenship for certain undocumented immigrants. But with the barest majorities in both chambers, no easy path ahead.
Despite
as tension between the wings of the Democratic Party ramps up in the House, where moderates, in a letter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, are pressing leaders to pass the Senate infrastructure bill now, saying, quote, the country cannot afford unnecessary delays. Immediately drawing sharp rebuttals from progressives who refuse to support that bill until the second measure is ready for passage. Pelosi making clear the bipartisan bill will go nowhere until that second bill is complete.
Whatever you can achieve in a bipartisan way, bravo. We salute it, we applaud it, we hope that it will pass soon. But at the same time, we're not going forward with leaving people behind.
Now, the real question is, will Nancy Pelosi stand her ground as House Speaker? She claims that she will not allow for a floor vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill unless both pieces of legislation, the infrastructure bill and the budget bill, make their way to the House. But here's the issue. As you saw in that report, you have corporate Democrats in the House who are urging the House Speaker to allow for a floor vote on the bipartisan bill immediately, regardless of where we're at with the $3.5 trillion budget bill. And that is a problem, and we should name them by name because we do have some more information about the letter that they sent her, and we should know who they are. So, a group of 6 moderate Democrats, they're conservative corporate Democrats, of course, has started circulating a letter addressed to Speaker Nancy Pelosi that urges her to bring the bipartisan legislation to the House floor for a vote as soon as possible. And here's what the letter says. We must bring the bipartisan infrastructure bill to the House floor for a standalone vote. This once-in-a-century investment deserves its own consideration without regard to the other legislation. Separately, as we begin the reconciliation process, we have concerns about the specific components of that potential package, meaning we don't like the $3.5 trillion package. The $3.5 trillion package includes tax increases for individuals making more than $400,000 a year and for corporations. And we're not like in favor of that, you know? These are people who help fund our campaigns. These are people who have more sway than our constituents, who overwhelmingly support the $3.5 trillion bill based on polling. But we listen to our donors and we protect our donors, and our donors don't want tax increases. They talk about the spending, right? Pay close attention, because they'll never say, of course, they'll never say, we're looking out for our corporate donors, they don't want to pay more in taxes. What they will say is, we're worried about the deficit. The deficit, guys, the deficit. We're so concerned about the deficit. So that's why we're, raising some red flags here. But let's vote on that corporate giveaway bipartisan infrastructure bill first. Let's do it as a standalone bill. So the question is, will House Speaker Nancy Pelosi stand her ground, or will she cave to these corporate Democrats? And who are they? The letter is being circulated by conservative Democratic representatives Josh Gottheimer, Jared Golden, Kurt Schrader, and also Vicente Gonzalez, Ed Case, and Philmon Vela from Texas. So those are the lawmakers who signed on to that letter. They want a standalone vote on that infrastructure bill. They do not support, it's already very clear, the $3.5 trillion budget bill that includes everything that actually benefits the lives of working Americans. And so it's important to know who our friends are, who our enemies are, who looks out for corporate interests, and who looks out for their own constituents and ordinary Americans. We don't know how this is gonna play out, but progressives do have some leverage here. If progressives withhold their vote on the bipartisan infrastructure deal and ensure that they also get a vote on the budget deal, I think that all of that hard work, all of that campaigning to get them elected as they were primarying corporate Democrats will pay off. They need to hold their ground. They need to stand their ground. And I think that progressives specifically, have the ability to do it, and they'll have my full support if they do. There's no reason we should allow corporate Democrats to be the ones who have all the sway over the future of this country, over the future of the infrastructure bill. If you want the corporate handouts and the corporate goodies, you gotta give us something in return. That's what progressives should be saying. And they are saying it, to be fair. The question is, will they hold their ground? We'll see.